Continuing the introduction of Jesus to his public ministry, I'm not sure exactly where we are because the bookmark slipped, so I'm going to start here. The fact that Jesus submitted voluntarily to John's baptism is wholly unaccountable on certain dogmas long assumed to be unquestionable. The commentators who adopt these dogmas follow one another in a dreary march around what they suppose to be a difficulty, which they really make into a difficulty for other minds, but which they do not remove. The simple statement of John himself ought to throw much light on the subject. He says that he should be made known to Israel, therefore am I come baptizing with water. That seems quite explicit. The hope of a Messiah was intensifying its element of expectation when John's ministry opened. He felt the depths of his great nature stirred with a call to arouse his people to a preparation of heart for the great advent. He did not entertain those thoroughly spiritualistic views of the Messiah's kingdom which have since obtained. He believed in his personal reign a great spiritual improvement, a discrimination, a dividing, a burning up of the chaff of his own nation, a cleansing of the Jewish people for the establishment of a purified theocracy to be administered by the Christ in proper person. It was not simply the kingdom he was to announce, but the king. Something in this man's soul told him that in the course of his ministry of heralding the kingdom, the king should be revealed to him, and he should point out that being to his people, and that his ministry was virtually to cease. Upon the inauguration of Jesus, John was functus officio. Jesus did not come to John for instruction. Surely every reader of the history who reads it, even in the most common human way, must see that as a teacher, the man Jesus was superior to the man John. He did not come to him to be baptized with a baptism of repentance, change of mind, for he had held these views of the spiritual theocracy as long as John had. He was at least John's fellow prophet of the coming kingdom. He had thrown no obstacles in the way. He was not a priest, a conventionalist, a ritualist, a fossilized conservative of decent heterodoxies. It was not a sacrament that John was to administer to him. It was not an induction. It was not an induction. It was not an induction into a priestly office. The baptism administered by John to Jesus had no precedent and was not a precedent. No. It was a singular act, in fact, in human history. The man who was to be the ruler of the human mind in the ages to come and was to ascend to the highest throne in the kingdom of thought, the man who was to be the ruler of the human heart in ages to come, so that no one was to be so deeply, highly, tenderly, reverently loved as he. This man was the Son of Mary. Now, if you compare the reverence held to Muhammad, it's less so, really, without taking him as a deity. Like, his commands have long been a more serious thing among people considered to be Muslim than people considered to be Christian. Even if Christians outnumber, there's more people, really holding dearer than oneself and that sort of stuff. He had been ordained to its place in the harmonious arrangement of the universe, and hence is called the Christus. From, see, so ordained, so this is not the main figure, and it's not the ruler of anything, but, a secondary representative figure, which is, grand and exalted as it is, but, the time for his inauguration had come. He was to be revealed to the world through the ministry of John. One needs to be very tender and thoughtful as one studies this great passage, great not only in the history of Jesus, but in the history of the world, for the history of all humanity was from this time forth to be changed by him. Whatever there is of fact should be studied with historical discrimination, and whatever there is of poetry, wonder, awe, and beauty should, if possible, be studied with poetic appreciation. What, so they're deciding, oh, that's not as believable, let's consider that like a poem. Well, you can have poems that are literally true, and the different parts of the Bible don't really divide into, oh, this is historical, this is, it's all supposed to be an investigated and compiled sacred history, which doesn't set that far off, but it has been well said that it is of manifest importance that what we see, we should see clearly. We are not indeed to require as an absolute condition of faith that we should be able to see or even to image distinctly to the mind the thing in which we are to believe, because there are things which, from their very nature, do not admit of being pictured even to the imagination, such as God or one's soul. Of course, our emotions and our thoughts can direct and such, and we can just say, people can pick a random name and pray to it, and they convince themselves that it's the, not only in charge of their own thoughts and feelings, but it's, and typically these things have no idea that anybody's doing anything like this, but I mean, there are people who encourage it, but see, Edinburgh, Rev, Volume 46, is it Review? Page 339, England, okay. But when the matter proposed is confessedly an object of sense, a scene that addresses the eye, clear vision is supremely desirable. We may not ask to see those things which eye hath never seen and can never see, but of that which professes visibility. Let us have the distinctest sight. According it is necessary to a due faith in the baptism of Jesus with its attendant circumstances as a fact, that it should be distinctly represented to the mind with this understanding and singular desire to apprehend the actual state of the case. What it was that occurred on this occasion, let us examine the above account, Jesus and his biographers, by Furness, page 147. Jesus came voluntarily to John's baptism uninvited. Had John seen him before, possibly several times, they were kinsmen. Probably seldom. They lived apart in a country not very easily traversed in their day. Possibly never. There is no history. John says in chapter 131, I knew him not. This may mean one of two things. Either that he had no knowledge of the person of Jesus, so that he should recognize him on sight, or that he did not know that this was the wonderful being whose arrival his great life work was to announce. Well, don't they have Jesus go around and kind of remind people, try to get people, don't make it about me, worship God, don't tell people what I did, did not know that he was the Archimenos, the coming man, until certain wonderful phenomena made the whole plain to his mind. The submission of Jesus to the baptism of John was another blow at churchism, priestism, and all that form of thought which attempts to run the streams of God's graciousness through ecclesiastical aqueducts. How, if someone else is required to baptize you, rather than like when a person becomes Muslim, they bathe themselves? With so many other groups, you just bathe yourself, and it's no one has to be even present to see what's going on. I mean, you don't have to be undressed or anything to get baptized, but you know what I mean. Jesus was a layman, so was John. Jesus was about to begin the ministry of grace, to assume the kingliness of the power of purity. He did not order the conduct of the pomp of the inauguration at imperial Rome, nor at sacerdotal Jerusalem. Not in palace, not in temple. He went out into the open air, under the open sky, beside the running stream. He would not have lictors and chamberlains and priests about him, a rough, unlearned layman, exhorting the people to be ready for him. That was a sufficient herald. He was going to lay the world open to goodness and to God. He was going to rend the veil of the temple and of all temples. He was going to abolish hereditary religions and tear away whatever stood between God and man, whether it were temple veil or erroneous thought, a chance rail or a dogma, or a rubric or a canon. Whatever stood between the father and the child, he was to destroy. Okay. So if it's not literal with others, it's obviously not literal with Jesus. He was never to use the phrase the church in all his ministry. And a lot of the church in the Bible is ecclesia, which is a little broader than that, which increases the problem with some stuff, because a public gathering that includes more than family, more than the immediate family is ecclesia, so that, it restricts women more, basically. But in other respects, it clears some stuff up. So it's a toss-up, referring to the Greek. His kingdom was to be inclusive, not exclusive. His kingdom was to be inclusive, not exclusive. His people were to be every man a king and every man a priest, a royal priesthood, a holy generation that should know no distinction between clergymen and laymen. When Jesus approached John for baptism, the latter hesitated if he had never seen him before, or not since early childhood. There was something in the appearance of Jesus which arrested his attention. He was not like the people who usually flock to his ministry. There must have been a remarkable absence of traces of worldliness, world care, world sorrow, world passion on the brow of this rare young man who had grown up under influences so pure, from a birth so marvelous. He must have looked like one who had always been in the kingdom of the heavens, the coming of which John was preaching. Why should he be baptized with all his vehemence and power? The great-hearted John was modest. When he looked at Jesus, he declined to baptize him and said, I have need to be baptized of you, and do you come to me? The reply of Jesus was simple and decisive. Suffer it now, for thus it becomes us to fulfill all righteousness. As though he had said, whatever you perceive, which you think is against your baptizing me, proceed with the right, and you shall then know something beyond. If you are divinely moved to believe that in the regular discharge of your ministry, preparation of the Anointed One is to be revealed to you, your obvious duty is to go forward baptizing every comer until he come. If there be anything in me, in all my previous growth, in all the development of my soul that predicts for me, and of myself a great solemn destiny, I must not refuse a baptism of heralding the kingdom of the heavens. If your work be of God, O humble layman, and I have come from God, I must make no divergence and no opposition, but go through with it, and then it shall come to pass that I shall be revealed to you, and shall be certified in my own soul of that calling of which, from earliest childhood, I have had growing intimations. How much of this Jesus said, or whether he said merely what is recorded in the text and looked at the rest, we cannot know. Okay, so admitting that there's parts of the Bible that are not well, yeah, we really don't know what's representative and what's actually said and what also could have been said. But it's spiritually dangerous to just, well, it's possible the following was said. As long as you admit that it's possibilities, not a theory. But John knew the history of his birth and the marvels thereon, attending, and he baptized him. It was a momentous crisis for both parties. John was to have a sign of the Messiah when the Messiah should appear. Jesus was to come to the fullness of the perception of his place in the world and the world's history. Others went down to the water, confessing, and came up, shouting. He descended in solemn silence and ascended from the river, with face upturned in worship. Then occurred a phenomenon mentioned by all the historians. Well, none of the historians, but the myth makers. Something like a dove descended upon Jesus. Now, not all the Gospels mention that sort of thing, but the four that people refer to, that much is patent. What else we may discover by rereading the passages. We must either accept these books as histories or reject them. I accept. Well, yeah, you accept that there is some sort of investigation, sure, but you can reject them at the same time, or you could say, well, probably half-truths, whatever, but they must then be dealt with as other histories, and what is marvelous must no more be explained away than what is commonplace. What was this that appeared like a dove? All the four historians use the same phrase, whatever it may be their variations elsewhere. I believe that it was actually a dove, if I were to read four accounts of the coronation of a king, in which there was represented that something like a dove descended upon him. I should say it was a dove. I say so here. And, there's a lot of that augury of birds and stuff like this. So, some bird shows up on the scene. It's like, oh, that's the, but see, isn't the bad hereafter like hell? I mean, like the south of Jerusalem when it was a garbage dump, a flaming garbage dump. Well, not everything flamed, but you know what I mean. People would burn stuff at the dump, but let's say so here. Now let us bring the scene and the personages clearly before us. We are standing beside Jordan. Here is a powerful, masterly man proclaiming a coming kingdom, and here is a man who is to take the lead of all the world's men, upon whom, as never upon any other, there are to come gifts of insight, purity, and elevation of character. John does not know of Jesus as later men shall know it. He knows him, a child miraculously born, in whose early history There had been passages not common in human biography. He is looking daily for the Christ of God, the anointed of Jehovah. He feels that Jesus is his superior. On sight, he acknowledges that superiority. What must have been the face of that man whose presence hushes the outspoken John, that John, whom mobs of soldiers and peasants and crowds of rabbis and committees of Sanhedrim, Eam or aim or whatever, ym is the plural, so there's no s at the end of any of those terms, only roused into intenser flame of hatred against sin. He that is higher than John is on the pinnacle of all that is human. The man that overawes John has mastery of humanity. With what intense excitement must John have gazed upon Jesus, and when Jesus came up from the water praying, transfigured with his own intense intellectual and spiritual excitement, it was a moment of rapt awe to both. At that instant a dove descended on Jesus, whence no one saw. It seemed to come from heaven. John had the assurance that a sign should be given him when the Messiah rose to his vision. He was advancing along the line of his ministry when this remarkable state of affairs was come upon, namely, a man of wondrous sanctity and appearance comes to his baptism. John feels that this is his superior and is compelled to acknowledge it. The candidate makes no confession. He comes from the water in a state of great spiritual exaltation. A dove from parts unseen descends upon him. It was, to John, the Holy Spirit of the great Jehovah descending, the expected and anointed deliverer according to previous intimations. And of course, if you look before the Christian thing, Ruch Kadush is what we typically call Gabriel. So, Gabriel was not God. Gabriel was not considered to be part of God, but they kind of, did something to the idea, right? And Gnosticism predates Christianity, so, yeah. Barbelo. But Barbelo wasn't always personified and put in a separate character. Now, if the presence of Jesus could have produced such an uprising of the mind of John, there must have been something divinely powerful in Jesus. It was John who was selected to discover the Messiah and to declare him to his generation. There was not only the appearance of a dove out of the opening heavens, but the sound of a voice. The voice was not a mere rumble as of thunder. There could have been no thunderstorm. It was clear in a rare degree, for the heavens were opened. The sound was articulate. It was the vouchsafed sign. John heard it. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Jesus heard it. Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. We have explained the Son of God thing in other programs, but it certainly wasn't limited to Jesus. Any theory may be set forth, but here are the facts. It may be said that it was an intense state of mental excitement which made these men hear what they supposed to be a voice. Suppose that if God speak to you articulately, just as a human being does, or prefer so to quicken your inward being, that you receive thereon precisely such impressions as come to you ordinarily and normally through your senses. It is to you precisely the same. There's no difference in the result. All great souls that have dedicated themselves to great deeds of self-abnegation and heroism have felt, seen, heard powerful communications from the great Creator. Well, I don't know about all, but things they took in a spiritual context was more common amongst that, but impressions are frequently made directly upon the mind without intervention of the organs of sense, and they seem just as men are accustomed to receive through those organs, and then they are spoken of as visions or voices, as the case may be. It is not a question of such vast concern in which way they come. This confirmation, in which way came this confirmation to John? He was not a cold, hard materialist. He was a man of high wrought spirituality, and Jesus was the finest piece of human organism of which any history gives us any account. These men not these men met in a circle of circumstances described by one of them. John says, I saw and bear record that this is the Son of God, which he might have meant the other meaning, somebody attached, an intelligence belonging to God. If he was satisfied, surely we ought to be. It is as unphilosophic to be incredulous as to be superstitious. Well, isn't there a couple passages where John and Paul in the Bible says that a person should not engage in philosophy, even though it's obviously that a bunch of types of philosophy were used in the composition of the Christian part of the Bible, but men have no reward when they exert their intellects to reason themselves out of their faith. Faith of what can be believed is as important as science of what can be known. Jesus thus inaugurated his public ministry. Now, faith is not just what's passed on. Faith is, it's semi-supported, but you adhere to it, even though it's not completely supported by the facts.